He was born on a quiet evening in a forgotten village, under a sky that looked too vast for such a small, fragile child. From the very beginning, life seemed determined to make him feel unwanted. His father left before he could walk, and his mother, burdened by poverty and exhaustion, would often stare at him with a distant sadness, as if she saw in him the reflection of a life she never chose. By the time he turned 7, he had already learned the meaning of rejection. The other children mocked his torn clothes and the strange scar that curved across his cheek, a mark left by an accident no one cared enough to ask about. Teachers ignored him. The world, it seemed, had no place for a boy like Jairo. But Jairo had something no one could see. Beneath the silence, beneath the roughness and the scars, burned a quiet hunger to matter, to be seen. He found peace in sketching faces, trees, dreams he could never touch. At night, when the world slept, he drew by candlelight until the wax melted to nothing and the paper tore beneath his trembling fingers. Years went by. The village grew smaller as people left to chase fortunes in the city. Jairo stayed. He worked in a mechanic's shed, fixing other people's broken things while his own heart remained cracked and hollow. Every woman he tried to love turned away. "You're kind," they said, "but not the kind we want." It stung more each time. Then came the day that changed everything. It was raining hard, one of those storms that seemed to wash the whole world away. A car had stalled near the edge of the road, a sleek black sedan that looked out of place among the rusted bicycles and carts. Jairo went to help, his clothes soaked through before he reached the car. When the window rolled down, he saw her. She wasn't like anyone from the village. Her voice carried grace, her eyes a quiet sorrow that mirrored his own. She introduced herself as Amara, a name that sounded like music. She was on her way to the city, but the rain had trapped her, and Jairo, without hesitation, offered to fix her car. He worked under the downpour, his hands trembling from cold, but steady with focus. She watched him, not with pity, but curiosity. When the engine finally roared back to life, she smiled in a way no one had ever smiled at him before. It was a small thing, but to Jairo, it felt like sunlight breaking through years of darkness. She thanked him and offered money, which he refused. "Just drive safe," he said, wiping his hands. But before she left, she asked softly, "Do you always help strangers like this?" Jairo hesitated. "Only the ones who look like they've lost something." Amara laughed, though her eyes glistened with something deeper. She left that night, but not before promising to return. Jairo didn't believe her. People like her didn't return to people like him. Yet, 2 weeks later, she did. She came back with new tires for his tools, food wrapped in fine paper, and stories of the city. They talked for hours in the fading light, and every visit after that, something inside Jairo began to mend. She told him about art galleries, music, and dreams that stretched beyond the dusty roads he knew. And when she discovered his sketches, hidden beneath piles of broken machine parts, she was stunned. "Jairo, these are beautiful," she whispered, tracing her finger along the charcoal lines of a face that looked suspiciously like hers. "They're just drawings," he said, looking away. "No," she replied firmly. "They're pieces of your heart." For the first time, someone saw him, not as a poor mechanic or a boy with a scar, but as an artist, a soul capable of beauty. But beauty always attracts shadows. Word spread that the mysterious city woman was spending too much time with the rejected boy. The villagers whispered, then sneered. One evening, when Amara returned, she found Jairo standing by the workshop, his face bruised from a fight he hadn't started. "They said you're using me," he said quietly, eyes dark with shame. "Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm not someone you should be seen with." Amara stepped closer, her voice steady but trembling. "Don't ever let small minds decide your worth. You think you've been rejected all your life, Jairo, but maybe the world was just waiting for you to see yourself." He looked at her then, really looked, and something shifted. They spent that night under the stars, talking until the sky turned pale. For the first time, Jairo felt that love wasn't something to be earned, but something to be shared. And yet, just when he began to believe happiness could last, Amara disappeared. No word, no goodbye, only silence. Days turned to weeks. The villagers whispered again that she had gone back to her real world, that Jairo had been foolish to believe in miracles. The pain of her absence cut deeper than all the rejections before. He stopped drawing, stopped smiling, stopped hoping. Until one evening, months later, a letter arrived, creased, rain-stained, written in handwriting he could never forget. It said, Jairo, if you are reading this, it means I have failed to keep my promise. I didn't mean to disappear, but life pulled me into places I couldn't escape. I never forgot you. Every sketch, every word you spoke, stayed with me. I'm writing this from a hospital in the city. My father, he's dying, and they won't let me leave. But if fate allows, I will find my way back to you. Amara. The letter trembled in his hands. The ink had bled where tears had fallen. Maybe hers, maybe his. Jairo folded it carefully and pressed it against his chest, as though holding it closer could bridge the miles between them. That night, he didn't sleep. He stared at the stars through the cracks in the roof, whispering her name into the darkness. The next morning, something awakened inside him. He decided he would go to the city. He had no address, no money, only a name and a fragile hope that the universe would not be so cruel as to bring him love just to take it away. He sold his tools, packed a small bag, and began his journey. The city was everything he feared, loud, unforgiving, filled with faces that didn't see him. Days turned into weeks as he searched every hospital he could find. He asked nurses, receptionists, strangers on the street. Some shrugged him off. Others gave him kind but hopeless smiles. Still, he refused to stop. One evening, as he wandered through a crowded street, rain began to fall again, just like the night they first met. The world blurred around him, neon lights mixing with raindrops on his skin. He ducked under the awning of a bookstore to take shelter. Inside, through the glass, he saw something that made his breath catch, a sketchbook on display. The cover bore a familiar signature, Amara in. His hands trembled as he entered. The woman behind the counter looked up as he approached, dripping wet, eyes burning with disbelief. This artist, he said, pointing at the name. Do you know where I can find her? The shopkeeper hesitated. She used to visit here, she said softly. A few months ago, she brought her sketches herself. Said she was working with an art foundation nearby. Jairo felt his pulse quicken. The shopkeeper gave him the address, and he ran, through the rain, through the streets, through the ache in his chest that had lived there all his life. When he reached the foundation, it was closing for the night. He begged the security guard to let him in. The guard frowned, recognizing the desperation in his eyes, and after a pause, nodded. Inside, the walls were covered with paintings, vivid, breathtaking, alive. But one, hanging at the far end of the room, froze him in place. It was his face. Not perfect, not idealized, but real. Every scar, every shadow, every ounce of longing painted with tenderness only she could have known. Beneath it, a small plaque read, Asterisk, the man who saw me when I was invisible. Asterisk. He stood there for a long time, his throat tight, eyes burning. A woman in a gray dress approached him quietly. You knew her? She asked. He turned slowly. Where is she? The woman hesitated, then said gently. She was very ill. She left the city weeks ago. Said she was going somewhere quiet. Someplace she once called peace. Jairo knew instantly. His village. He ran again, this time not from pain, but toward hope. The buses were full, so he climbed into the back of a truck, gripping the letter as though it were her hand. The journey took 2 days, every mile a prayer. When he finally arrived, the sun was setting behind the hills. He saw her before she saw him, standing near the workshop, thinner, paler, but radiant in a way that broke him. She was sketching the horizon, her scarf fluttering in the breeze. For a moment, he couldn't move. Then she turned. Their eyes met, and all the words he'd wanted to say vanished. She dropped her pencil, tears welling in her eyes as she whispered his name. Jairo. He ran to her, not caring who watched, not caring that his hands were shaking or that the world seemed to blur around them. She fell into his arms, and for the first time in his life, he felt whole. I thought I lost you, he breathed. You almost did, she said, smiling faintly. But something told me you'd come. They stood there for what felt like forever, the silence between them filled with everything they couldn't say. Amara stayed in the village after that. She wasn't strong enough to return to the city, and Jairo didn't care. He rebuilt his workshop, and she painted in the sunlight while he worked beside her. Every evening, they sat together under the same tree where they first talked, sharing dreams and fears and quiet laughter. But sometimes, When she thought he wasn't looking, her eyes clouded over with pain. He noticed, of course, though she tried to hide it. One night, he found her sitting outside, clutching her chest, her breath shallow. "Amara," he whispered, kneeling beside her. "Tell me what's happening." She smiled weakly. "I didn't want to tell you, because I didn't want your love to turn into pity." "Don't say that," he said, his voice breaking. "You think I love you because you're strong? I love you because you're you." She reached up, tracing his face with trembling fingers. "Then promise me something," she said. "When I'm gone, you'll keep drawing. You'll tell our story. You'll make sure no one ever feels invisible the way you once did." He gripped her hand tightly. "Don't talk like that." But her smile deepened, soft and knowing. "Jairo, love doesn't end when we do." The days that followed were filled with fragile happiness. She grew weaker, but her laughter still filled the air like music. She painted until her hands could no longer hold the brush, and then she asked Jairo to finish her last piece, a portrait of them, together, beneath the rain. He did. Every line was a memory, every shade a promise. When he finally showed it to her, she whispered, "Perfect," before closing her eyes to rest. He sat beside her that night, holding her hand as the moonlight brushed her face. The air was still, the world quiet, as if time itself paused to listen. And though she drifted into sleep, her last words lingered in his mind, soft, fragile, eternal. "Love found us, Jairo, even when we stopped looking." He didn't know then whether she would wake again, or whether the dawn would steal her away. All he knew was that for the first time in his life, rejection had no power over him. Because even if the world turned its back, love, real love, had seen him, and that was enough. So he sat there through the night, whispering stories to the wind, promising he would finish every drawing, every dream they started together. The candle burned low, shadows flickered across their faces, and outside, the first drops of rain began to fall again, soft, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat that refused to fade. And in that moment, the rain came heavier that night, as if the heavens themselves were mourning or perhaps blessing what was about to unfold. Jairo sat still beside her, his rough fingers gently wrapped around Amara's delicate hand. The candle flickered, its flame trembling in rhythm with his heartbeat. Her breathing was soft, fragile, each rise of her chest a whisper of time slipping away. He wanted to believe she was only asleep, that she would open her eyes again and smile that radiant smile that had once turned his gray world to color. But deep down, beneath the storm's hum, he could feel something shifting. The air, the silence, the space between one heartbeat and the next. The first light of dawn crept slowly into the room, turning the world golden. Jairo lifted his head, the lines of exhaustion and fear carved deep into his face. He watched her as the light touched her skin, painting her in hues of warmth and serenity. Her face was peaceful, too peaceful. "Amara," he whispered. No answer. He called again, louder this time, desperation lacing every syllable. "Amara." But the only reply was the rain against the roof, steady, unrelenting, eternal. Jairo's chest tightened until he could barely breathe. His trembling hand brushed her cheek, still warm but motionless. He pressed his forehead to hers, tears spilling freely, soaking the pillow between them. He didn't scream. He didn't rage. He simply wept, silently, as if the world had ended and yet somehow kept turning. When the villagers found him hours later, he was still there, holding her hand, his voice hoarse from prayers that had no words. The same people who once whispered cruelly about him now watched in silence, guilt heavy in their throats. They saw, maybe for the first time, what love truly looked like. Not perfection, not wealth, but devotion so pure it defied death itself. They buried her beneath the tree where she used to sit and paint the sunsets, where laughter once echoed and dreams had been whispered into the wind. Jairo carved her name into a stone himself, his hands blistered but steady, each letter a vow. Amara Nyong, the woman who saw me. For weeks after, the world seemed drained of color. He went through the days like a shadow, fixing broken engines by habit, speaking only when he had to. But at night, he would sit by her grave and draw. Faces, skies, stars, the memory of her smile. One evening, as the orange glow of sunset bled across the sky, he noticed something strange. People from nearby villages had begun to visit. They came quietly, standing near the tree, leaving flowers and candles. Someone had heard their story, and word had spread. They called it the tale of the mechanic and the artist. Children would sit near the tree, listening as elders told the story of how love found a man everyone once ignored. And every time someone retold it, Jairo would sit silently nearby, sketching, listening, remembering. The foundation in the city soon learned of Amara's passing. They reached out to Jairo, offering to hold an exhibition in her memory. At first, he refused. She hated attention, he said. But when they explained it would honor both her and the man who inspired her final works, something in him stirred. He traveled back to the city, the same city that had once swallowed him whole. And this time, he didn't walk with fear, but with quiet pride. The gallery was vast, filled with her paintings. But one wall stood empty, a space reserved for him. He placed his sketches there, drawings of her, of the village, of the rain that had first brought them together. People gathered in silence, moved not by fame or beauty, but by the truth that radiated from every stroke of charcoal and brush. A journalist asked him, "You were once rejected by everyone. What does it feel like to be celebrated now?" Jairo smiled faintly, his gaze lingering on the painting of Amara's eyes. "I was never looking to be celebrated," he said softly. "I was just looking to be seen." She saw me, and that was enough for a lifetime. The exhibition became a sensation. Critics called it a story painted in heartbreak and light. Artists traveled from distant places to see the works of the man who had turned pain into poetry. And through it all, Jairo never forgot why he was there. Every evening, when the lights dimmed, he would stand before her portrait, whispering stories of the village, of the children who laughed under her tree, of the life that kept growing where once there had been loss. He would tell her about the girl who started painting after seeing Amara's art, about the boy who stopped mocking others after hearing their love story. In every telling, he found her again. Years passed. His hair turned gray, his hands slower, but his eyes still carried that quiet fire. The village, once forgotten, had become a place of beauty. Artists came there to paint. Lovers came to promise forever beneath the same tree where Amara rested. Her name lived in every story, every color, every dream that dared to bloom. One rainy evening, many years later, Jairo sat in his workshop, surrounded by sketches of faces and skies. The candle burned low, just as it had that night long ago. He picked up a piece of charcoal and began his final drawing. It was her again, but not as he remembered her last. He drew her as she might be now, smiling, radiant, untouched by pain. He drew himself beside her, older, weary, but still looking at her as though she were the only light left in the world. When he finished, he set the drawing beside her old letter. The rain tapped gently against the window, and a soft wind carried the scent of wet earth, the same scent that once marked the beginning of their love. He closed his eyes, the weight of years lifting from his chest. And somewhere between the rhythm of the rain and the beating of his tired heart, he felt it, a warmth, faint but real, like fingers brushing against his cheek. He smiled, because love like theirs didn't vanish. It lingered, in sketches, in stories, in hearts that dared to believe again. It was the kind of love that outlived rejection, outlasted time, and turned pain into beauty. When dawn came, the villagers found him seated peacefully, his head bowed slightly, a small smile still on his face. The drawing lay before him, finished, perfect, framed by the gentle glow of morning light. They buried him beside her, under the same tree that had witnessed it all, their first meeting, their laughter, their goodbye. And soon, that place became sacred ground for dreamers and wanderers, for anyone who ever felt unseen. Years later, a young couple stood before their graves. The woman was an artist, the man a mechanic. She looked at the names carved into stone and whispered, "They found love when the world said they couldn't." Her husband smiled. "Then so can we." Above them, the wind stirred the leaves, and the faintest sound of rain began to fall, soft, rhythmic, eternal. Some said it was just the weather. Others swore it was something more, the echo of two souls who had found each other again, beyond the edge of time. And perhaps, if you stood there long enough, you could almost hear her laughter in the wind and his voice answering softly, as if the story had never really ended. Because in truth, it hadn't. Every raindrop, every heartbeat, every whispered promise carried a piece of them, Two souls who had once been broken by rejection, only to be rebuilt by love that refused to die. And somewhere, far beyond the reach of pain, beneath the eternal rhythm of the rain, they still walked together, hand in hand, heart to heart, proving that even when the world forgets your name, true love never does.